It is really great to be in this room again. I realized when I walked in, the last time I was here was on June 21st, a couple years ago, when I held a personal prayer vigil from sunrise to sunset to pray for those who had Alzheimer's and for their caregivers. And all day long, different people joined me. And this is really a great place to just be still and be in the Lord's presence. When Deacon Marion asked me to come here today, I thought back on my own life when I've experienced God's healing. And I realized that each experience has happened not when I was off by myself in the woods, but within community. And that probably should not have surprised me. After all, we just heard Jesus say, when 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I am there in your midst. And that is not a new teaching. If we go back to the very beginning in the book of Genesis, we read that God created the first human beings, male and female, he created them. He created them in his image. Now, after years of reflection, I've come to believe this doesn't mean that God made a man in his image, a woman in his image, but he made 2 humans in his image. We catch a glimpse of the image of God in community. At the heart of God, we find community, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. And we're drawn into that intimate community. And it's within community that we come to experience God's grace, God's healing. And so I want to share with you one experience I had that I don't believe I've shared, at least not in this context. For several years, my father-in-law was in charge of the printing at General Convention. Today, that job doesn't exist. They all have their laptops and computers. But there was a time when every day, these massive copiers cranked out sheets and sheets of things for the deputies. One year, convention was going to be in Anaheim, California. My wife and I had 2 children, 2 years old and 4 years old. And we came up with a great plan. We offered to work for my father-in-law, where one of us would be in the print shop helping out. The other one would be with our kids and my parents, exploring Disneyland, Knott's Berry Farm, SeaWorld, and my father-in-law would pay for it all. So he agreed, as long as he got 8 hours at least out of one of, a combination of the 2 of us. So we went out, got the print shop set up, took our kids with my parents to Disneyland. And then we hadn't been there more than a few days, and our 2-year-old son comes into our bedroom at night, and he said his tummy hurt. And up comes dinner. So I got my clothes back on, went down the street, got some ginger ale and a heating pad, gave him the ginger ale, came back up again. He just kept bending over on the floor and just kind of lying on the floor and writhing. So the next day we told my father-in-law what was happening. He said, I just met a deputy from some other diocese. He's a physician. He's a pediatrician. Let me see if I can call him and have him look at your son. So this doctor looked at our son, wrote a prescription. I went back to the pharmacy, got the medication, gave it to our son. It came up again. And he threw himself on the floor again, just holding his tummy, just writhing in tears. We went back to the doctor. He said, I don't know what to tell you. He said, you need to take him to the closest emergency room. So we got in the car, drove through the freeways of Los Angeles, went to an emergency room. They checked him out. They did some x-rays. They prescribed a different medication. We went back to our motel room, gave him the medication. It came up again. We're now 3 days into this, and he's getting quite weak because he's not keeping anything down. No fluid, no food. We took him back to the emergency room. And they said, we have no idea what's going on with your son. But we're located right next door to Children's Hospital of Orange County, one of the best in the country. We want to have one of the surgeons examine your son. So she came over to the ER, and she said, I can't tell you what's wrong with your son. I need to do some exploratory surgery to find out what's going on inside. We had no choice. When? Right now. So they put our son in a little gurney and took him over to the children's hospital. They put a tube down his nose into his stomach. He was so weak at this point, there was no flinching. When they put the needle for the IV in his arm, he didn't even twitch. It looked as if life was just draining right out of him. We called our parents, my in-laws, told them what was happening. They took Michael off to the operating room. We went upstairs. A couple hours later, our two bishops and their wives came. They sat with us. They prayed with us. The surgery seemed to go on forever. My wife and I went to a little chapel there. We prayed together and had a very palpable sense of God's presence. And we both left that chapel holding our hands, and my wife said, "He's going to be okay." And we sat there in the lobby with our bishops, and we watched the elevator doors open, nobody, and close. And open, and nobody. 2 hours watching the empty doors open and close. Eventually the doors opened, and the surgeon came out. In her hand, she had some little Polaroid pictures she showed us. I have no idea what she was showing me, but the bottom line was that the umbilical cord, when it's attached to the small intestine, there's a little bump that goes flat for most of us. For my son, it didn't. And so his intestine kind of kinked up like a hose. And so nothing could go through anymore. She said, we caught it just before gangrene set in. We resectioned his intestine. Your son's going to be okay. But you need to be aware that there might be adhesions. If you see the same symptoms again, take this file to your doctor, bypass all the other diagnoses. It's going to be adhesions. They're going to need to operate again. Well, we're not going through this again. Our son spent several days in intensive care in the hospital. He took his teddy bear and flung it away. If he could have flung us, he would have flung us. He blamed us for what happened to him. My wife and I took 8-hour shift turns, so that one of us was there with him all the time. Eventually, our son was released. Once he could walk up and down the hall, we went with my parents one trip to Disneyland, hoping he could leave with a happy memory. Flew back to Southwest Colorado, where we lived at the time. And we were really glad as young parents that chapter was done. That was a tough parenting lesson. We lived in Cortez, Colorado, which is near what they call the Four Corners area. Denver is 9 hours away by car. People feel our diocese is big. It was 9 hours over two 10,000-foot passes. So whenever I went to Denver for the diocesan meeting, and I was chair of the Commission on Ministry, I flew. Well, 4 months after our trip to Anaheim, I had a meeting in Denver. It was our wedding anniversary, so my wife and I had a reservation for a restaurant to celebrate anniversary when I got back. I had to get up around 5 in the morning to catch a flight out, had a long day in Denver, came back. I was exhausted. I opened the door. Our two sheepdogs jumped all over me. My son ran up to me. I picked him up. He pushed away, threw himself on the floor, flipped over, and started writhing, holding his tummy. And I thought, holy bleep, I've seen this before. And I felt at that moment like a marathon runner at the end of the race being told, do it again. And I thought, I did this. I can't do it again. We called our doctor. He was out of town. You got to see his partner, who did not have a good reputation in town. He examined our son and said, nice mommy, nice daddy. He's got the flu, go home. We said, no, read the chart. He said, it's the flu. I said, please, contact our regular doctor. He said, fine. He did. He said, you know, I think he's right. It might be adhesions. We had another physician in the parish. He was a surgeon. He examined our son. He said, I can do the surgery. And I said, really? Last time was in a top-notch children's hospital in Orange County. We're in Cortez, Colorado, in the hinterlands. He said, trust me, we can do this. The first surgery, our son was so weak that it was almost easy to let him go because something had to be done. This time, our son was still quite alive, full of energy. They didn't roll him off in a gurney. I had to carry him to the door of the operating room. There, a nurse grabbed him. His hands clung to my sweater. She had to yank him away from me. And I stood there as they let him away. He was screeching with his hands stretched out at me, just terrified. And I thought, we prayed in California. I felt God's presence. And I wanted to pray as I prayed in California. And I couldn't find the words. The best I could do was, there wasn't church words, but it's basically, my God, why have you forsaken me? They took our son off, went back to the cafeteria. At that moment in my life, I felt 1,000,000 miles away from my wife, even though she was next to me. I didn't want her touching me or talking to me. I'm sure there were lights in that cafeteria. It felt like a very dark room. There was no sense of God's presence. God was, in my perception, completely gone. And we sat there waiting. Little by little, members of the congregation whom I ministered to when they were going through a tough time came in. Mostly they sat with us. A short prayer, a gentle touch. There's several hours again. By the time Dr. Howe came after surgery, something had changed. And I became aware that the room was lighter. That while I was there being PO'd to God, he'd snuck in the room and was just there, sitting there, surrounding us with people who loved us, who cared for us. Our son was going to be fine. He's 41 now. He's doing fine. But it was within community, by disciples surrounding us with their love, with God's love, that I was able to experience a healing. I'd never read or even thought that someday I'd have to say, I forgive you, God. I forgive you for making me go through that. Well, forgive me, really. Forgiveness, healing, community, it's real. And I'm grateful that God healed my son. I'm grateful that God healed the relationships that were banged up through those experiences. And I share that story with you in the name of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.